And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is me, I'm Jo Cook. I'm your host for today, and I'm going to be facilitating our conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. We think that conversation is really important because we've got technology that is bringing us together, which is really nice. But the way I like to approach this, it's a bit like at a conference where I think you get the most valuable kind of learning and social element over having a cup of coffee with somebody and having a chat. That is our approach to our training journal webinars. You've got that chat window that you can use with each other to get going, to note things like our audio wasn't very good just now, so thank you very much for that as well. You've also got a question and answer pod at the bottom. You won't be able to see all the questions, but if you're thinking, I really want to make sure that they don't miss my question, you can type it in there and we'll definitely see it and get our speakers to have a look at it as well. If you want to, what you can do, if you want to open up your microphone, if you want to try and speak and ask a question at any point, we really encourage that. And there's a hand up icon at the top of the screen you can click any time to get our attention. Also, you can join us on Twitter on #TJwow, and I can see a few of you are doing that already, so thank you very much. All of our sessions are available online, our recordings, more webinars, and obviously all of our other wonderful content is all available on our website. Now, these are our speakers today. We have Sarah, Sally and Neil, and I think it's probably about time that we jumped into our session and go and speak to them. So let's get our webcams going. I should have just transferred over. Sorry, everybody. So we're going to get all of our webcams started. So good morning. Thank you very much for coming along. And we're looking forward to your questions, your comments in the chat window. Our discussion kind of starting point for today is all about customer service. It's all about, well, what can we learn about customer service in order to make our own learning and development practice a little bit better. So we're coming on webcam now. We've got Neil here, we have Sarah, and we'll have Sally with us in just a second. Let's have some introductions first of all, so we can get to know who our speakers are today. And also get going in that chat window. Let us know your thoughts about customer service, about how we can service our clients better in L&D. So Neil, let's hear from you first of all. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about what it is that you focus on in learning and development.
Thanks, Jo. Morning all. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm an independent learning and development consultant with a background in 30 years of being in IT training, L&D, learning technologies, and latterly I was head of technology assisted learning at my previous employers. I'm now working independently. I'm actually quite engaged with this whole topic area, hence I think you asked me to contribute, in as much as I think I'm a customer in all sorts of different facets of life, but I also think that in L&D, both internally and externally, sometimes it's quite difficult to get to who the end customer really is and who it is we're trying to make a difference to. So I'm interested in exploring those sorts of things and hearing what everybody else has got to say today.
Thank you very much, Neil. And Sarah, let's come to you and find out a little bit more about what it is that you do in your role in L&D and how do you see that customer service element? Oh, and now we're getting no sound. This is excellent. We have a couple of those technical gremlins this morning, don't we? So we've definitely unmuted you, Sarah. What you might need to do, Sarah, is for some reason, these are all these things that we check early in the morning and then they don't work. Are you there, Sarah? Is that working again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm the Managing Director of Stairway Consultancy. We're a customer experience consultancy, so we work with a wide number of organisations and really passionate about getting customer service to be part of the culture of an organisation. And I'm a judge on the Customer Service Awards for TJ, and I've also written a lot of books articles and manuals around what I call customer experience rather than customer. And just speaking to Niall's point about who is the customer, in L&D terms, I often see we've got two sets of customers: the actual client and then the customer who's the end user. So that's where I think we need to satisfy both sets of needs.
Fantastic, Sarah, thank you. And it's interesting, Neil and I have been talking about that a little bit earlier on. So we're going to obviously unpick that difference between the client and the end customer and see what that has, what impact that has on what we do in L&D. Thank you very much. And Sally, so welcome to the session, and glad to think we've got your audio sorted out, Sally, is that right?
Let's give it a go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, absolutely perfect. So Sally, tell us a little bit about your role and about what you do.
So I'm Managing Director of Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a people development business, and as Sarah said, we get involved as well in lots of customer experience transformation programs with our clients. You'll typically find us working with household brands that you would know and love well, so the likes of the big banks and the big utility companies and the big telco companies and people like that. And a lot of our work involves partnering actually with internal L&D and HR teams to deliver the transformation. So we're often involved in working not only with the teams that serve the end user, but we'll also be working with the teams that are, as Sarah said, working with the client to deliver the transformation. So have lots of experience of partnering with L&D professionals to do exactly that. Just a little bit about us as a business. Our mission and purpose is to make the world just a little bit more human. So with all of this amazing technology, which I'm slightly terrified of, customer experience in our mind is all about a human experience.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. And that's a really interesting point, that we have the human experience, we have, you know, technology, it should be an enabler, and in most cases it certainly is. But then we also have that kind of point about the client versus the end customer. Now, you know, Sarah started this and she's got the ball rolling for us. So Neil, you and I have talked a little bit about this. So what are your thoughts on the difference between your client and the impact on the bottom line? And we'll come to Sarah afterwards to expand that thinking a little bit more.
I think sometimes it's difficult to get to the nub of what the performance issue is, and I think sometimes I've found both internally and as an independent that sometimes the commissioner of whatever the work is hasn't necessarily focused on what the end result and what the end impact on the customer is going to be, and they don't necessarily view the people that they would like learning to happen for to actually relate that back down to the end of the game. So I think there's a tendency for there to be a little bit of a disconnect, so that what tends to happen is that the learning will happen in its own little bubble, but it doesn't actually, and therefore we can't demonstrate proper return on that investment, because we can't get to the bottom line. I think where we can do that, it can be very effective, but I think sometimes it's about encouraging the commissioner, the customer, to actually understand that themselves. So the smart customer, if you like, that we can then help and support.
But that's interesting. It's about kind of making that impact, and sometimes our direct client is actually a barrier to getting to the learner, the performance, the bottom line, whatever that might be. Interesting. So before we come to Sally on this, Sarah, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think a lot of this goes down to the role that consultants play within an organisation, either whether they're employed or actually a vendor. I believe very strongly that a lot of this comes down to understanding customer needs by doing great LNA in terms of needs analysis. But I also believe that part of the role of an external consultant is to be able to understand the business, and maybe to challenge a little bit the client around around their initial thought, or where they see the actual need or requirement to be, so that you add value by bringing in a different perspective. So I think it's a combination of really understanding the customer, the end user needs, but also at the same time being prepared to challenge and bring a different perspective in terms of adding value.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So it's really interesting. So whether we're internal to an organisation or external, it's all about bringing in our skills, knowledge, and maybe that different perspective. Sally, what are your thoughts on this topic around that kind of end client being perhaps not necessarily the client you're dealing with?
So I think what's really interesting about customer experience in the new economy is we often find, as an external supplier coming inside an organisation, we'll often find that we are in some ways, and it kind of plays to Neil and Sarah's points, we're in some ways educating the client, because actually in the new economy, as we know, customer experience doesn't look anything like it used to. And so in a world where our customers are now, whether they're internal or external, using very different tools and ways of communicating, and their needs are very different, it's really important, I think, that everybody really understands what a great customer experience looks like. And in the olden days where it was all about delighting and wowing and tap dancing at the front door and all of those amazing things, hearts, flowers, and confetti galore, and maybe not confetti, but the customer experience has massively changed, and now more than ever, what customers or clients are demanding is a lower experience, and being able to demonstrate you can drive an effortless experience in everything that you do. And in the new world, there are very different skills in what we're seeing that drive that, and very clearly, this is that polite, professional and friendly is only a hygiene factor in the new economy. There are very different ways of driving an effortless experience, and I think whether you're trying to serve an internal client or trying to build teams that can serve an external end user client, really understanding what good looks like is at the heart of getting it right, for sure.
Absolutely, and I think some really interesting points about what customer service used to look like, what people experience themselves, and then also kind of what it is, what those skills are that we need to develop. So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So first of all, in the chat window, Laura, thank you very much for your comment. She says, yes, I work in a small charity in service has a requirement for training, but the end user are the people we deliver that to, and it's how they experience this activity. And I think that's that point that I think we forget this from an L&D perspective, is that we might be training, for instance, people inside our organisation or our client's organisation, but actually those people are impacting the organisation's customers. And I just want to kind of have a look at that just a tiny bit more, and then look at, well, what skills do we need to be able to develop that further, as Sally has just been highlighting. So, Neil, is that anything that you want to kind of expand on, that difference between training maybe some staff and impacting the customer of the organisation? I think that's something we've chatted about a bit before. hindering or blocking that? That's a great point, Sally. Thank you. And I think any challenge should probably definitely be met with those questions. Sarah, what are your thoughts? Have you experienced that in the past where maybe through will, maybe through lack of just knowledge, for some reason the commissioner is blocking access to the learners?
Effectively mystery shop or look at what that experience is like from an external perspective. So maybe it's about convincing the commissioner that it is, first of all, vitally important, but secondly, that there are methodologies which you can use which are non-destructive and don't take too much of the learner's time.
Thank you, Sarah. Some really great points there, really focusing on, well, why is there that block? Is it, I'm worried about taking up time of my attendees when they could genuinely be worried and thinking, well, I'm going to pull them out of their work for a half day, a day, a week, whatever it might be for the training anyway. Productivity-wise, we can't afford any more of that time, so that could be a huge challenge. Leslie had added, with regards to the commissioner, it could be partly an ego thing, that I know it all mindset of the commissioner. And Leslie says, I'm thinking about one customer when this happened, and I was only allowed to send out pre-course work to learners as opposed to speaking with some learners ahead of time. Oh, what a challenge. And I always think it's quite a skill for a trainer to be able to walk into a cold room, if you like, not knowing anyone, and build that rapport and get going. Neil, any thoughts on that point about trying to get closer to the learners if you've got somebody blocking the way, whether that's willfully or just how it is? Any thoughts on that?
It's difficult to do that without being seen to be arcing somebody, but I think in the discussions, one of the things I've always tried to do when we're actually getting into some kind of program, or it looks like it's going to develop into a program, I will ask the commissioner what resource or individual or subject matter expert they can release to work with us on the project, so that it introduces somebody that's actually a practitioner in whatever that skills area is. they have a voice in that space, and they may themselves be much better connected to their own colleagues that are out there at the chalk face, actually doing the work, if you like. So I think there's things we can do there that it takes some of the load off us as facilitators by bringing in some more resource. Let's be quite frank about it, but also it brings in the rest of that connection to those that are doing the job, and that I think it enriches it.
Great point, thank you, Neil. So we've got some, hopefully there, Leslie and everybody else who's in that situation, a few little tips and hints and ways to think about kind of around that, and hopefully, you know, in the chat window or on Twitter, please do continue that conversation. I think we've got a really quite an interesting question here next, but from Frank Kalberg. So Frank, we know your microphone was open earlier on. So are you there, Frank?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. So, so what was your question, Frank, that you wanted to ask specifically to Sally first, but obviously to everybody else as well?
Yeah, I think you had some fantastic thoughts. And you were mentioning the importance of...
Oh, Frank, we're not hearing you very well. So, Frank, if you've got a headset, you might just want to put that a bit nearer your mouth. We can't hear you terribly well.
Okay, I'll try to speak a bit louder. Is that good now?
Excellent, carry on.
Okay, great. So, Sally, I think you had some really very interesting thoughts, and what I was wondering was particularly regarding helping people reconnect to the purpose of the organization, or I think you used the word mission. How do you do that concretely? And can you please mention one or two examples how you've done that?
The brilliance of technology, Frank, is that just before your question was delivered, it was on the screen up in front of me to the right-hand side, and I have to tell you, I was squealing with excitement to answer this question. So let me begin. I'll try not to overtalk. So when we're doing any kind of transformation, whether it's a customer experience transformation or whether it's a cultural transformation, at the heart of that we know sits, for any good business that does this really well, sits a clear and compelling either ethos or purpose. So I don't want to get too hung up on the words, whether it's vision or purpose or ethos or whatever an organisation wants to call it. But we know when it works really well, there is a clear view of what that organisation stands for. So, and any organisation can create that if they don't have it in absolute clarity. And so at the heart of any really good people transformation is a clear and compelling ethos that the organisation kind of stands for and hangs its hat on and says, this is what this organisation stands for. And once we have that clarity, so we would do work with the company to help them to create that clarity with the senior team. Then the job, which I think is where your question is coming from, is how do you then connect the people in the organisation to that clear and compelling vision or purpose? And actually, do you know what the answer is? Simple in the way that you say it, a lot of hard work in what it actually looks like. But one of the ways that we would do that with the company is to help create their narrative around what they stand for. So we would support them in building what we call a 5-chapter playbook that the leaders create, and then we do what's called a leadership cascade. So every single leader and manager in that organisation is able to tell their own version of that narrative that will meet the needs of their own people. So it's, I suppose, black and white in terms of being really clear on what you stand for, being able to create the narrative that goes with that, and then getting every leader and manager to make that story and narrative their own as you cascade it through the business. In practice, that's obviously a lot of work and it's quite challenging, but equally, start with that clarity. It's incredibly difficult to connect anybody to the purpose of a business. It definitely sits in the hands of leaders and managers who clearly own the engagement of their people. The last thing I'd say on it, and then I'm happy to talk longer about it, but the last thing I'd say is really good for people engagement businesses or good for service businesses not only have clarity of what they stand for, but leaders and managers in those organisations systematically do what we would call visible demonstrable actions. So things that demonstrate we are committed to people and customer in our business. So a couple of examples, one organisation that we know, the higher up the food chain you go, the further away from the building you park, thus demonstrating our people need to be ready to serve. So as leaders, we park further away. There are a lot of leadership teams that I know that love that example. But, you know, in another company, everybody does 4 hours of customer calls every month, demonstrating that customer is important. This is what we stand for here. So there are literally hundreds of examples, and feel free to connect with me after and I'll send you loads more. But, you know, a clear ethos that you cascade through the business, and then leaders demonstrating through their actual actions that they stand by that vision.
Thank you, Sally. Gosh, lots of information in there. I've just shared your contact details again, and we'll have them at the end as well, everybody. So, you know, all of our speakers are really, really lovely in giving up their time. So do connect with them and definitely ask more questions as you want to. So some really good points here about actually kind of, I think it's walking the talk, isn't it, or whatever the saying is. I think maybe I haven't had enough coffee yet, but it's about getting involved in doing those things. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this question around kind of connecting people with the ethos of the company?
It's a really interesting point, because what we're finding, initially our research said it was mainly Generation Y looking for this, but I think personally that everybody wants meaning in their work, so they want to really feel that they're making a difference. And what we're seeing is those organisations who have a strong sense of purpose actually have higher levels of employee engagement, they're more customer focused, and actually in terms of business performance, they certainly outdo those with less clear identity and vision, I suppose. But what we see is, just linking to Sally's point, it's how you engage the leadership team in making this come to life. So we believe very strongly in storytelling and ownership. So just building the points being made, we say it's not what you say, it's what you do in terms of customer experience. And I think what people are looking for is the opportunity to really identify with the organisation they work with, and in doing so they take stronger ownership and responsibility, and that actually increases the level of customer experience. So yeah, very wholeheartedly agree with the whole, I suppose goes back to the service profit chain, making certain that a clear purpose links to leadership, links to employee engagement in order to deliver a great customer experience.
Thank you, Sarah. Some really nice kind of bits that you're all linking together there to make that whole point about the customer. You're almost back to the point that we were saying at the beginning of we need to understand that kind of whole context, really. Neil, any thoughts on this point about, you know, connecting people back with the organisation before we move on to our last question today from Linda?
Yeah. I'm going to take a slightly contrary view on this one, in as much as that it sounds great in principle, but it needs to, that cascade has to work from top to bottom. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between what's said in public and then what's done in private. And I think where you will lose engagement, or where engagement gets lost, is where if the internal behaviours don't reflect the public statements, and whilst the intent may be all focused on the end customer, and certainly the talk is about the end customer, I think sometimes that can translate into people being managed differently to try and achieve that. And I've seen examples of that, but in principle, I'm totally with it. If you haven't got the buy-in, you haven't engaged the people at the sharp end, then you've got a problem. And I think you've only got to look at things like the current public transport situation in the south with a well-known railway operator who shall remain nameless. There's the poor bloody customer just being, I want to be really rude, but you get my drift. And it's just through, there's a statement of what they're trying to do, and then there's the behaviors, and then you've got the customer, and everybody is disconnected. So yeah, I'm with Sally and Sarah totally on the principles. I think the storytelling is a fantastic device. The narrative, making it live, getting people to commit, and sharing that enthusiasm, fantastic. If you don't get that, then you get the other situation.
Thank you, Neil. And I think you make a really great point there about kind of the almost negative impact on the customer experience when that doesn't happen. It's a really interesting contrast to make. Thank you. We are going to answer Linda's question now, and we only have just a few minutes. So I'm going to encourage you to be rather nice and compact with your answers on this one, everybody. Linda says, we run a 5-week training program in which we first meet the new starters, embed our culture, and then teach them the skills for their job. How can we ensure that we meet both the needs of the learner but also the customer in an ever-changing environment? So we could probably do a whole hour just on that conversation and that question. But let's have some things that Linda could think about in terms of, we're trying to look at those two things in the customer experience. So Sally, what are your thoughts first of all?
Well, and I'm going to try and keep this concise because I know I have a problem with that. When you're talking about a 5-week training course, I'm imagining that it will be some sort of induction where the people involved will be probably delivering for customer. And so many things I could mention here. One of the things that we do when we help organisations rebuild their entire induction programmes, largely will be engaged actually to try and reduce time to competence. So how do you make it shorter time in the classroom for best return on the outcome, which I'm sure is one of your challenges. But one of the things that we do to try and meet both of those objectives, which is fulfilling the how people learn best and the what's right for customer outcomes, is instead of teaching like people normally do, which is to do here is our what the company is, then what our products and processes are, then what our systems are, then what our customer experience is, we'll turn that on its head, and every day you will learn if there's a reason for a customer contact, then you learn the product, process and systems woven through the reasons for contact. So instead of teaching them in isolation, we weave them through reasons for contact. So you learn all of the skills, the processes and the systems when you're dealing with why a customer would have contacted the organisation in the first place. So it kind of turns the induction processes on its head, and it is how people learn best. Don't just teach me things in isolation and then expect me to string them together myself. Teach me how it's going to happen in reality and bring the right bits to the interaction. So you meet both of those objectives in a really inspiring, effective way, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sally. Some really interesting points, and building on from that, Neil's just shared in the chat window that context is everything. So Neil, what are your kind of top tips around this challenge? Then we'll come to Sarah to finish off.
Very quickly then, following Sally's model. I shudder a little bit when I hear about a 5-week training program, to be honest. I'd be interested to know how that's spaced out, how much is done pre the onboarding, during the onboarding, what the blend is around that, and how that's then monitored back out in the workplace, what the follow-up is and all that sort of thing. The thought of going into an organisation and doing 5 weeks in the classroom would terrify me, quite frankly. So I hope that there's more around that than that implies. So I guess that's also my answer, is that I would stage it. I would be engaging before people have even joined the organisation. I'd be, building the culture, making the introductions, use video to say, here's the workplace you're going to be working in, here's your colleagues, here's a welcome, before they've even walked in the door, and then, get into the contextual stuff. But a lot of that, I'm assuming, would be go and walk the shop floor, So I think there's a whole raft of things that you could do in those circumstances. But again, it goes back to Sally's point. It's all about the context for the customer. So that's what I'd say on that.
Thank you very much, Neil. And then Sarah, lastly, your thoughts to share to help Linda and also anybody else in a similar position.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, what my thoughts are is very much around how do you weave the customer into the 5-week program. So we've been really successful in adopting techniques where the customer comes into the organisation to talk about their experience. We've used techniques such as adopt a customer, where new recruits actually have access to specific, not just customer data, but customers in person. We make certain that we look in induction programs around customer segmentation, working with organisations such as Age UK, looking at techniques for things like how to deal with vulnerable customers. So effectively, the programme itself starts with the pinnacle of we're here to serve the customer. Let's we better understand what's that like from the customer perspective, and the more interactive and customer focused you can make the programme, the better understanding and appreciation of the need to deliver a customer experience right at the beginning of that culture action process. We find is really, really key.
Thank you, Sarah. So some great points there about really building on what we're talking about, bringing that customer literally into the process. So thank you for that. So we are going to move, and Linda says thank you very much, which is absolutely brilliant. Our pleasure, Linda. And thank you very much for that brilliant question. We're now going to move into some time for reflection. So we're going to come off the webcam now. We're not finishing. Neil, Sarah and Sally are all staying here to be involved in the conversation. Let's just have a little wave goodbye. We're going to come off webcam now, because what we're going to do is do some reflection on what we've had to think about today. So we're going to have a look at what are the action points we can take away from this. But first of all, let's actually go and practice with our text tool so that we can all go and write on the whiteboard. So have a look on your screen. Hopefully what you should be able to see now is an annotation toolbar. And what we'd like you to do is just have a practice with the T text tool. So what you can do is just use the T on the left, or you can, if you're on an iPad or a tablet, so Amy, that would be you, you can use the pen tool if you want to, or you can just carry on. Reflect is an annotation toolbar. And what we'd like you to do is just have a practice with the T text tool. So what you can do is just use the T on the left, or you can, if you're on an iPad or a tablet, so Amy, that would be you, reflection on just what we've had to think about today. So we're going to have a look at what are the action points we can take away from this. But first of all, let's actually go and practice with our text tool so that we can all go and write on the whiteboard. Have a look on your screen, that would be you. You can use the pen tool if you want to, or you can just carry on using the chat window. It's entirely up to you. Reflection on just what we've had to think about today. So we're going to have a look at what are the action points we can take away from this. But just use that T text tool and go and type on the screen. And just let us know some of your action points you're taking away from the conversation we've had with Neil, Sally and Sarah today. So we've got people saying, know our customer. Yeah, that's a really good thing to take away from today. Absolutely. Contacting Sally to learn more about the playbook. Thank you. Love the idea of building induction from a customer journey perspective. Persevering, getting close to the learner. That's a good point, that perseverance. We're not necessarily saying this is an easy thing to do. Interweave customer service issues throughout induction and not in isolation. Communicate messages from top to bottom and engage with all customers. Spend further time getting to know customers, learners and their needs. Be more human. What a great message. So Sally, that's a great message. I think probably that's come from you about be more human. What are your thoughts on that? So Sally, one of the comments we've got is be more human. That's a message I think that's come through from you. Oh, maybe we don't have Sally with us anymore. Okay, never mind. And
I think I'm back. Debbie, I'm back.
Yay,
yay. The only reason I've jumped back in there was because I definitely want to comment on that. I saw it come up on the screen and I couldn't be more excited. It wasn't me, but somebody wrote be more human. And I, you know, as an organisation and as a human being, personally, my mission is to make the world a little bit more human. I couldn't agree more. Hurrah!
Thank you very much, Sally. Glad that we got you back there. We've got other people saying engage before they start. So I think that was a key point from you, Neil. So that's something that's nice to come through. What are your thoughts about that engagement before they start even at an organisation? Thank you very much for that, Neil, for developing that kind of a little bit further. And you say about there's different ways of doing it. At the bottom of the whiteboard, somebody has shared. I think I also heard Sally say that as many people as possible communicate or work directly with the customers. I would think social media could be helpful in this respect, because so many people now kind of are on maybe Twitter and quite happy to complain about bad customer service and so on. Other comments that we've got here, further pushing for the customer journey mapping and measuring, and a really good point about developing customer personas. So Sarah, I think that was something that you were talking a lot about, is kind of really getting to know your customer, and that customer persona I think is quite an important part, isn't it?
Very much so, and recognising the need to be flexible with the different personas. So again, that can be embedded into any intervention that you undertake. But just picking up on Neil's point about pre-induction, we've certainly had lots of success in using apps prior to people joining organisations, and as part of that information, no matter what technology you use, actually starting to talk about the customer and the customer persona. So people right from pre-starting have a sense around, you know, the type of people they're going to be dealing with and the type of service that they're looking for. and I think it really helps to develop that customer centricity. And at the same time, you want people to be proud of the organisation that they're going to work for, and talk about it in a in a positive light, whether or not they've actually started in the organisation or not. So I think developing some clear understanding of customer persona, and can link that also to journey mapping the different experiences that customers have, I think is really key to better understanding customers' needs.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sarah, for just kind of highlighting all of those points together. You know, we started our conversation around customer service, and we're talking induction, onboarding, kind of all different parts of this. And it just goes to show, you know, how interlinked everything is. So thank you very much to Sarah, to Sally, and also to Neil. We've had a fabulous conversation today, and also thank you to everybody who asked questions in Question Pod, made comments and questions in the chat window, for sharing things, to Frank sharing some more stuff here as well. And Rachel, no worries that you have to go. Thank you very much for coming along. I've got at the very bottom there, you can see we've got some links, which I'll share with you in the chat window as well. You can have a look at our webinar recordings, and this webinar will be on our Training Journal website as well. If you think, actually, I'd really like to continue some conversation, you can get involved through our Training Journal forum. If you want to continue the conversation on Twitter, you can do. You can also contact Malika, who's our Business Development Manager, if you're thinking, actually, getting involved in some webinars would be a really great thing. What you can do, you can get in contact with us on Twitter anytime, so thank you very much, everybody, for that. I'll share those contact details as well. Also, what we've got coming up next month for our December conversation, it's all about creativity and innovation. I think all of our kind of webinars, all of our work involves creativity somewhere along the line, but we're going to be talking about this a little bit more specifically next week. So once again, thank you very much, Neil, Sally and Sarah, and hopefully see you soon next month.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.